Welcome to the Curiosity and Command podcast supported by Kaizen Summit. In each episode, we sit down with thoughtful people to explore leadership, discipline, growth, and the ideas that shape how we live and work. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Justin Maker. Justin, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, to kick us off, can you give us the headlines that has brought you to where we are today?
Okay, so as it does with most people, it starts from quite an interest in childhood, which then led me into martial arts. That was probably quite an important grounding of sort of discipline that I needed from a rough childhood. Then as I moved through that, I got surrounded by some really, really good people that built good, strong qualities in me that I could see that made good men. Then from there, I wanted to test myself a little bit further, joined the army, had experience with going on tour with Herrick. Then when I came back after the tour, because there's some stuff that went on through that, came back with some mental health issues, which then pulled the thread on everything else that happened to me in the past. Did a lot of work trying to regain what I believe would be my sanity at one point, which helped me rebuild myself, actually. I was surprised just how lost I was until I was really lost. And then I was able to start putting pieces back together to move forward in my life. From there, then, I then went into starting up my own business. I'm leaving the army. I still had the army in the background as a reservist, but then set up a PT business, just as a sole trader initially. During lockdown, that created another set of issues. Obviously, you couldn't go into work or anything like that. So that had the pressures of that coming out. Middle of lockdown, children, more pressure arrives. Then after lockdown, I was able to open up PT business again, get up and running, expand, and then keep growing through that to a point where I am now. And thankfully, honestly, I'm thriving, which is brilliant.
Obviously, I've known you for a long time now, and I have been very fortunate to be along your journey for certainly the last long time now, actually, thinking about it. Nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
How did you start to rebuild yourself?
So the break, I think, is probably the most important point. It wasn't necessarily the tour instances on its own. It was actually to do with the relationship that I was in at the time. It was with a partner that I was with who had borderline personality disorder. And when your own personality has gaping chinks and holes in it, you start losing yourself very, very quickly in that. Unfortunately, she got pregnant. We were in a really bad situation. Like, I remember at one point being in a car with her, and it was just all out war in the car, this argument. And all I could think about was, I think I just want to drive us into a car, or into a wall, and just end it, because I couldn't see a way out of the situation that I was in. She was really, really struggling with things in her life as well. She had a really, really rough childhood. And from that point, I realized that I needed to try and pull us apart in some way, shape or form. I told her to get an abortion, which really, really put a lot of, I felt so bad for that. That was probably one of the hardest decisions I've actually ever made in my life, was to tell someone to get an abortion when she genuinely believed it was the thing that was gonna help her. At that point then, we'd broke up because obviously I made her do the worst thing in her mind that it could, and it still bothers me now that happened. I do understand that it was probably the best situation. However, when we did break up, I remember being sat on a park bench in Gosport at the time where I was living, and I just cried, sat on the bench and cried for about an hour. I was so lost. I didn't know who I was. I had no sense of identity anymore. All of a sudden, this situation that I was in with her had just disappeared. I became so much about her at that point, trying to manage everything around us, that I just honestly couldn't figure out a way out of it. So I found a psychiatrist actually, and I I was questioning life, the reason of life, the purpose of it all, why we're here. So then I spent it was probably about 3 months of like twice a week sessions with this therapist that I found. And I made a point of finding a spiritualist therapist as well, because a lot of the questions that I was having, I realized were very kind of like existential. I needed to get to the bottom of, is there a God? These kind of questions that still I don't have any answer to. But they did help me understand a little bit more about finding a meaning and purpose in moving forward in things just as they are. And that then helped me start putting the pieces back together in my identity and who I was. And thankfully, in all of that madness, I can honestly say that that's helped me now keep a very growth mindset and keep open to things. Whereas historically, I was very closed off. I was very locked out because my ego wouldn't allow me to take in any other information, because I was so built up about the fear of not being good enough or or being wrong, that I just convinced myself that I had to always be right about everything. No, there was no air around me. So all of a sudden then, after I worked all through that, it was like the door just unlocked, and all of a sudden I was like, actually, that I feel the most freest I've ever felt. So unfortunately, out of all of that sadness came probably the best version of myself.
There's a few things there that have really resonated with me, and one of the threads I want to pull on there is the self-image and the self-talk that you put yourself through. Can you elaborate on that, and maybe how has that changed as you've evolved?
So the image I had of myself, I would say, was foundationally built up of just being in a quite shit upbringing, having a mum that, to be fair, my mum had a shit life. Like, she was sexually abused when she was a kid, so she didn't really have she was just battling with life in general. So by the time she had me, she was in her 20s. Like, she was struggling with just life. She'd always be out drinking. By the time she was like 16, 17, she was already living with like biker gangs. She was wrapped up in drugs, violence. So she had no maternal instincts whatsoever, really. So growing up in that and living with a mum that was battling through that, there wasn't much time for me. So I can understand, as I grew up, as a child, you're always constantly trying to kind of be good enough for your mum. And as a kid, you internalize everything. As a little kid, you are just a little narcissist. You don't realize that the world is going on around you and that everything isn't down to you, but you don't have that information at the time. So what I found was, as I got to sort of 10 and 11, I'd been very, very good at trying to like manage situations and around people, but I just lacked any self-confidence. I noticed that by the time I left school, I didn't really do much school when I was with her until I got to secondary school, whereas my nan and granddad won a custody lawsuit to look after me. So I spent my secondary, I guess it's about 11, isn't it? Up until I was 17 and left school. And when I left school, I suddenly started getting around a new group of people where I started martial arts, and I saw them acting so differently. They had like a level of confidence that I couldn't grasp. It seems wild to think that they saw themselves up as men, and all I saw was this timid, scared little boy all the time. I didn't have any self-confidence, really, and it was just these guys that they were no older than me, but I couldn't fathom out how they had so much confidence, so much self-belief and self-worth. And it's mental. Even to this day, I can remember one of the lads, he was only like 19, 20, and he would have no issues going out down the pub. He would just get in fights with grown men, and this is not what I was aspiring to. But as a this little meek child, I was like, how can you do that? How can you be my age and fight grown men believing you're going to win? I just felt scared of life at that point, because that was all I knew was fear, really. So I had this constantly going in the background, gradually being with these people, these groups of people that I was sort of like seeing out and about before I quite got into martial arts, I started to attach this confidence, which was false, around that. And I started to act like I was confident. I was just mimicking them because I found I was very good at mimicking people and mimicking emotions. So I start stealing things and copying. And all of this, I started realizing I was kind of bolting bits of identities into myself that I didn't really own. And to be honest, like I realized how hollow it was. But gradually, then when I found my way into martial arts, I then got with some really, really good human beings. And they kind of saw this, they saw a good person in me. But at the same time, I'd already bolted some of this bad stuff. But either way, I was there and I was attaching these bits and I'd got a bit of confidence going on, but it came across as ego. Like if you didn't know me and you didn't bother, you didn't have a chance to get to know me, you'd be like, this guy is such a prick. Like he thinks he knows everything. He thinks he's good at everything. By the time I got to 19, 20 and I got a bit quicker at martial arts and I had more response time and I was winning a few competitions on like continuous semi-contact, I was like, I just telling myself, this is it. I'm the fucking bee's knees and no one can tell me anything. And I was a bellend. I cringe at thinking about how I was back then now because I realised like it was just false. Everything about it, everything about my identity, there was no room for me to breathe. Like no one could tell me anything about myself. Like, they were wrong, I was right. And that literally went. You could tell me the sky was blue and I would argue it was green. And there was that was how then I continued to live my life. When I got into the army, I was doing that over and over again. Just no one could tell me anything. I'm right, I'm wrong. When I would get into where I started seeing the weaknesses was when I would go into a competition and we'd go in. So a couple of times I got to semi-contact mixed martial arts and a full contact kickboxing. And it would be the moment that I got into the ring where all of a sudden I realised I was full of shit because all it was me and the other guy in there. And all of a sudden, all that confidence just melted away. And all I could think was, what am I doing here? I am not supposed to be here. And I talked myself into that situation with all of that bullshit. And it was in those moments that I was able to grasp and be like, this isn't me. But I didn't know how to peel all that back at that point. So I just kept getting deeper. So I was like, right, I'm going to test one. I need to figure out why I feel so scared. What is it? Do I need to push myself more? I need to prove that I'm a man. Like I need to put myself through the fire. So I joined the infantry, thinking that that would do it. So training has never been a problem. I would use training. Like I would push myself so hard because I believed that that was what was going to make me stronger. That was what was going to make me braver. If I'm stronger than everyone, if I can do this, I'm the best. Then we go on tour and it all shattered again. And from obviously from Mark dying and coming back from that, it was like all of a sudden the thread just got completely pulled apart again because like nothing, all the fighting in the world that I was telling myself that this was what was going to make me strong, this is going to be the thing, it just meant nothing again. And that's that voice kicked back in, you know, you're a scared boy. It just came back again over and over again. I couldn't get away from it, you know. And that's the voice, that inner critic that was just constantly pulling me apart. No matter what I did, it was never enough.
Training and building the physical form then for you became that self-validation because it wasn't
Absolutely.
an internal thing that you could create, so it became your external, look at my armor, look how impenetrable it is, so that you wouldn't allow the outside to see the 6-year-old Justin.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
fair to say?
absolutely that. Yeah, I even down to a point where when I had the motorbike accident that I shattered my arm on, that again echoed that so badly about that armor that was built up because in that moment when I broke my arm for 9 months, like I had nerve praxia and it was looking pretty much like I was not going to be able to use my left arm again. And I just all of a sudden I was like, I was this guy that had a paralyzed arm, and the amount of like mental gymnastics that I was going through because like I was like, what is my worth now? Like I literally, it was that moment when I suddenly realized I traded everything on my look, on my physique. And that was my self-worth. And like, how my view was, how is a woman ever going to want me now? And this is how it links into that childhood stuff, because always looking for validation from my mother, I then attached that to women. So I was very promiscuous when I got to about sort of 17, 18, 19, when I suddenly realized like this armor that I built, this body that I built up, I could trade for sex to try and win affection for. And then all of a sudden that was gone, because now I'm like, who is going to want a guy with a paralyzed arm? Because I didn't realize for 1 second that my worth could be anything more than what I built up this armor. And now I was a paralyzed guy with a floppy arm that did nothing, and my body was just wasting away in front of me. And right in that moment, I was like, this is it. All I was worth was what my body was, and that's gone now.
Would you describe these few like defining moments of suffering? Which I understand, suffering is subjective. You don't have to suffer. It's a choice. Through that, it was suffering at the time. Definitely, I don't think there's too much ways about it. But was that ego death an opportunity for you to start to figure out who you were beneath the uniform, beneath the facade, beneath the big pecs?
I don't think, if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be where I am now, because like it literally needed I needed to be broken down to nothing, because like the ego at that point was built up so much that I do believe to this day that if these things hadn't have happened in my life, I'll be walking around a bell still. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation, because I thought I'd be the bee's knees and no one could tell me anything. And here we are now, and I'm sat here chatting to you, and literally, like, when I talk to people about you, you are my guru.
Very kind of you to say. But let's pull on that thread a little bit then. So you said at the start that there have been these moments of people in your life that have opened up the door. Now, obviously, you're the one that walks through it, but as a young lad looking at the martial artists, looking at the mentors within the military, can you talk a little bit about how other people have supported you in achieving what you have done today and getting you to the point where you are now?
Yeah, so the martial arts instructors that I had provided so much for me. Like, so for instance, when I first joined it was Alvin Mighty. Now, at the time he was European world champion, kickboxing world champion. He fought for England. He was like the top guy, and he took me under his wing. That was really critical, because like all of a sudden I had a person that I could respect, insofar as like he was a savage. He was so strong, he was quick, but he was so calm and placid as well. He didn't lord his power around. He was, at the time back in Banbury, he actually run like the door security team. So we're talking in these sort of like early 80s, late 90s kind of thing. Like he'd set it up. He was the guy. All of a sudden I started realizing, actually, you can have power but be a good human being. He'd done the doors and stuff like that because he wanted to keep people safe. He wasn't a bully. That was his thing. He was like, he wanted to protect people. He had morals. He had standards. Like when we worked for him as his assistant manager for a couple of years in Birmingham and Northampton, generally the pub, Millhouse Inns at the time, it was called, the pub chain that he worked for, and they would give him the rough pups that they couldn't control. So he would go in and manage them. And because he had such strict policies on drugs, like he was absolutely no drugs whatsoever. So when you go into like an urban sort of like pub in the middle of Birmingham and you're going with that attitude, it's just war all the time. And he never ever changed his standards or morals. He never backed down to anything, no matter what the situation was. He had this, I remember reading Bruce Lee's book, I think it's the Way of the Fist or something, or Jeet Kune Do it was. And Bruce Lee had a saying in there, it was like, when it's your lot, there's no point in trying to discuss it. Just deal with it. And that was his ethic all the way through. And again, those glimpses of that that I'm right in what I believe. I believe it enough that I will die for that cause. And seeing that in someone was like, it was so respectable, and he held it all the time. And then moving through life, I had another instructor, John Shields, very similar in his ways. And these ethics, and they always helped me. You know, they weren't like, even though I was like so annoying, they had so much time and patience for me because they could see like they must have been able to see the good person in me. You know, they could see like maybe they could even see that I was that scared little kid. Maybe they connected to that in some way. Maybe it could be like, this guy just needs a hand. He's a good guy underneath. You know, and they were the ones to keep me sort of moving forward in a framework that just had so much more than structure, ethics, morals. You know, they were bound by such strong ethics and morals. You know, and then all of a sudden I was like, so these things, although that I weren't able to like completely put them into my life at that point, they're now things that I'm able to, that I have in my life now, and I stick to. You know, because I realise that actually when you've got that, it almost acts as your sort of North Star.
That's exactly what image came up for me there, is taking these lessons from people that you've learned along the way and aligning them to who you are, where you want to be, where you're going, and then using that as your left and right of arc of, I'm on this path and I'm staying on it. And then having that little voice in the back of your mind that wants to pull you off and go, ah, not today, flower, I'm on my path.
Yeah.
So what then led you from having these experiences and having that chaotic childhood and upbringing, what led you into coaching, and how does your story now align your philosophies on coaching?
So when I was ready to leave the army, I needed an exit strategy. I needed something that I knew and understood, that I could build on, and I knew training. I knew intimately. I'd been doing it since I was 17 at that point. And then I was, at that point, I was like 32, 30, around about the 30s, 35, I reckon. Yeah, 35. So I'd had a lot of life experience within training. But before I just joined the army, because at that point I'd had a black belt, I was then teaching and instructing kickboxing. I was doing a lot of gym work at the time to support that. So when I seemed like I know this so well, going into personal training is an easy route through for me. At that time, I wasn't even thinking about the coaching. It was just personal training, because there's a gulf of difference actually. So getting a personal training qual was the most logical thing, because I got that from the PT core, having the all arms PTI before I left. So I set up the business, just training people initially to get fitter and stronger. It was only gradually as I started connecting again with better people. I remember Harry, I had a client called Harry, runs a very, very successful business. He was so knowledgeable and so wise. He dropped a couple of like wisdom bombs on me at the time. He said, Justin, one day he said, Justin, if you don't mind me saying, like, I've known you now for 9 months. He goes, you need to let the anchor go. And I was like, at the time, you know when you understand it, but you're like, how? I didn't really know what he meant. And he was like, it's holding you back. You are worth so much more, but it's holding you back. I just did not know how to pull up that anchor. Then I ended up coming down on a posting to Plymouth. That was when we ended up moving in together for a while. That was probably the start of me lifting up that anchor, ironically. I started already sort of moving it. We had our conversations, and another nudge on the anchor was have a conversation with your old man, because there's some stuff there that hasn't been kind of like pulled up. I had a long think about how I was going to deal with that. I posed the opportunity to him to kind of talk through stuff. He didn't want to go over anything. So at that point then, that was another raise of that anchor that started helping me understand more and more about kind of like who I am. And as I started building up this picture of feeling more settled in myself, I was like, hang on a minute. I've been through an awful lot of life experience here, and when I'm personal training people and coaching people, I'm spending a lot of time talking to people about like the different things that I've experienced and the different things that have happened, and like the amount of therapy. Like over the last like 15 years, I have had so much therapy now from different instances that have gone on that helped me kind of like put together an understanding of solving problems, and I'm not running across me. One thing I'm not doing is like trying to solve anyone's problems. The first thing I'm like is you should see a therapist. You know what I mean? I am not a therapist, but as I'm talking about the things that I've experienced, I'm able to say like, and when I found out about this thing, this was the thing that I applied. Like I did a lot of sort of digging around into Buddhism to try and understand a little bit more about how to attach to things and how not to. Like you showed me the way into sort of like stoicism, and I started pulling bits from that. And as I'm starting to pull all these bits of information in, I'm then able to use this as a learning tool for myself, but also then I'm able to sort of like share information as I go through. So then when I'm starting to train people, I'm then able to understand a little bit about what makes people respond to certain things. And this is where like the coaching thing comes into it, because it's able to being able to connect to people, but it's also being able to understand not everyone starts at the same place, but how can I connect to this person? And it's like it's not being a cheerleader like, right, you can do it. It's actually being able to understand what the language that other person speaks. Some people might be good with just being told what to do. Some people might need a bit of a gentle nudge. Some people might need certain language on cues. Some people might be visual cues, audio cues. But all of these experiences that I've had now have allowed me to start understanding people all think differently. And because of that, how can I find the language that I need to get the most out of that other person that I'm working with? And this, then I started realizing, okay, this is what coaching is. Personal training is literally, here's a program, I'm going to count your reps. Coaching is like, how can I get the most out of this person? How can I make this person be able to take on board this information, translate it into the knowledge that they can understand, and then go away and do it? That is the coaching part of this. And it is all of these bits that I've been able to gather and pull together have helped me really kind of understand what the term coaching really means, and how can I help people find the path and move to the path without me just telling, do this, do that, do this, do that. It's, can I give them the tools to even be able to look at something and go, actually, based on what I understand about things, I know how to do this now, not because I've been shown to, but because I understand the principles behind how it all works.
Can you double click on something you mentioned in your description that we did ahead of the podcast about raising the standard of personal training? Can you elaborate on that from a zoomed out lens of the industry in general?
Absolutely, yeah. So even going back 10 years ago now, personal training qualification was still relatively easy to obtain. Like within sort of like a 12-week course, you could have your level 2 and level 3 done and dusted. Now we're talking a 12-week course, of intensive. You were there every day, like for 8 hours a day. And then over the period of 7 years and then a lockdown where everything went to online, all of a sudden that 12-week course got condensed down into 3 months at best in most cases, and completely online in most cases. And in that moment, all of the experiences that a personal trainer learns when they're being coached, or when they're being coached in that PT qualification, that level 2 and 3 in person, disappears. The nuances about how to talk to clients, even how to like get clients when you're working in a gym, that's all gone, because there's no one in there saying, actually, when you see someone over there, you're having a look at the form, going over, making a conversation. How do you build conversation? There's no even talking about how to conversate with anyone anymore, like how to talk to people and sort of chat relaxed, let her know how to execute exercises efficiently and correctly. So that's probably the most damaging part of all of this. Now, I'm very, very cautious in understanding that form is nuance. Like, there is not one perfect way to squat or deadlift because everyone's mechanics are slightly different. Everyone's limbs are different. But there are certain points within each movement that you're looking to attain. So if someone's got really long legs and long femurs, the chances are they're going to pitch over quite a lot in a squat. That doesn't make it a bad squat. You know, the forward lean doesn't necessarily make a squat a bad squat. If someone's got short femurs, the chances are they're going to squat very upright. That doesn't make that the right squat. But there are certain things that you're looking for that you don't get when you're doing a in-person course. So what happens is no one's showing you how to do any exercises. No one's showing you like the realms in which things can be right or wrong. So if, for instance, someone comes to that PT now and they only know the way they squat, they're then going to be telling the person who's got these different like levers that actually you're squatting wrong. And actually they're not squatting wrong. They're squatting right for how they squat. And that is a very, very important thing because all of a sudden you just got people I see people that should ordinarily be squatting quite wide feet because of their hips are more opened out, that they cannot squat toes forward. They just cannot physically do it, but they've been told to squat toes forward. So they start rounding their back and they're getting all buckled up because they've been told toes forward is the way to squat. Because that person who taught them, based on how they squat, that is the way to squat. And these things are the difference where the standard is slipping within the industry, because all of a sudden, all the person now has who's done the online course is their own N=1 experience, and they've never been in a gym before. You know, they've never coached anyone. They've not had all these experiences to be able to go, actually, there's variance in all of this arc. And then all of a sudden you get like these little echo chambers picking up where people have now started doing PT, their Instagram accounts running through, and they're sharing information that is based on them that is also wrong because they haven't been taught any better. So you're just getting this kind of system working around to a point where it's a bit of a shit show now. And that is where I really feel that it needs to all kind of like be dragged back in again and kind of like be brought under control. I did a lot of waffling there. I apologise.
I remember my personal training course. So I travelled up to Newcastle to do mine, and I had the best start I could have asked for in the tutor that was running it. So this is back in 2012, this would have been. And the guy running the course was his last course that he was going to be delivering. And his opening gambit at the start of the course was, "This is my last course, so I will teach you the syllabus. But this is my last course, so I will teach you what you need to know." And it was a fantastic experience for us because we could all pull on different threads that we would have never had if we hadn't have had that personalisation and someone that cared so deeply about human performance and optimization and development. And that if I'd had a generic input at that starting point there, I wouldn't have started to investigate any of the exciting, nuanced areas in S&C and personal development. For example, we had a whole lecture on xenoestrogens and the way that plastics are affecting your endocrine system. This is in 2012.
This was fringe back then, weren't it?
Yeah. Now, it's still not commonplace, but like back then I was like, oh my God, how is the receptacle that I'm drinking from affecting my biology? It blew my mind. And I'm so thankful that he had the courage to go off script and give us that early intrigue and curiosity. Have you, as you've gone on your journey, what I'm hearing from you is the lack of personalization in the industry, and there is a risk now with AI, which has made a lot of people more efficient, but where do you go to for trusted information now?
Exactly, yes. And what I know now and how I understand it, when you're young, which most people when they're jumping on a PT course are now, I say like majority of people, they're around about sort of 19, 20, 21. They move generally quite well anyway. So you can get away with being quite generic when you move quite well anyway. There is a huge difference between teaching someone who's 20, who's had maybe a fairly active lifestyle anyway, quite sporty, to training someone who is 35, been chained to a desk for probably 20 years, also has a couple of kids, gained a bit of weight, or a female, because if a guy, could be a woman. Their bodies have developed very, very differently, and you would not be able to train those two people in the same way. Not necessarily just because their cardiovascular systems, just because how they've developed learning to move over that period of time. I've worked with people now that cannot understand how to hip hinge from from demonstrating. It may take them, no matter from experience. I get everyone learns at different rates, which is another important thing as well. As you get older, you do learn differently. You can't mimic the same way. Those mirror neurons don't fire in the same way, because the whole point is, like, when you're young, you are adaptable, you're very malleable, and you can pick things up. And that's another important piece of information, that a young person doesn't really understand that alone. And if they're not told it, they're not going to get it. They're going to be like, well, why aren't you doing it right? And it's not realizing that it's not a client in front. It's not the client problem. It's the person not understanding that the client doesn't know how to move like that, because they've not had to hip hinge for like the last 20 years. They've done everything just by bending their back and scrunching the knees up. Having to taking someone from not being able to understand what a hip hinge is over a period, it can take up to like a month to 2 months sometimes to be able to get them to fluidly do it. Understanding that you need patience with that. It's not just a case of, oh, well, you can't do it, so we'll do another exercise and we'll forget all about it. It's actually that person still deserves the right to be able to do it. We don't have to flog them to death with it. Every time they come in, just punish them with learning to hip hinge. But it's understanding that actually, just because they can't do it now doesn't mean they're locked out of it altogether, but that you're going to need different approaches and different techniques to be able to help them understand how to cue their body back. There's so many different things that I've learned now on how you can help someone draw their hips back, how you can help someone connect into the ground with their feet. Because a lot of the time with things like hip hinging, it can be more of a balance problem, but no one realizes that. They think it's just a tight hamstrings problem. There are so many things that there can be going on that you need to really understand, and looking at the person to be able to set off with. And that's the advantage. Like when you're dealing with young people, they move fantastically most of the time. Within a couple of sessions, they've got it. And that is the issue that are coming through when you're young, trying to train someone, and you only know one pathway. You've had no experience to draw upon in all of that. So now it's like, can we start bringing a bit of that experience back in, just like you had? And I had the same when I went for my level 3. The guy inspired me in the same way. He showed me and told me things that got me digging into it a little bit further and a little bit deeper. And you do not get that on an online course. They don't tell you everything. They just sprinkle in a few crumbs, don't they? And that is just enough for you to suddenly realize there is way more. Because telling someone at the beginning of an online course, there's a lot more to learn out there, is not the same as giving them the breadcrumbs to want to know more. Okay, how does someone's like pelvis stability change their posture? How does them being extended through their thoracic spine affect their breathing and potentially be an element of why they maybe have anxiety with breathing and stuff like that? All of a sudden, or why do they get shin splints? Because they're pushed forward. If you're not told or even to look in any of that, you don't know to look for it.
What I'm hearing from you here, Justin, is this systems way of thinking and approaching your physical training as a complete system, that this part interacts with this part, interacts with this part, rather than this isolated set of limbs and functions. And is that how your philosophy of training has developed over the past decade and more, that you are now training systems? And how does that affect the way that you run your business as well? Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, so that is interesting. It is a system. Now, when you first start, you think all about body parts, machines, bicep curls, leg extensions, hamstring curls, and they all serve a purpose. And that's the wonderful thing about training in general. Everything is fit for a purpose, just understanding that purpose and how it works. But the system has to work together. It's all very well training a quad extension and a hamstring curl. However, if the central nervous system can't organize itself in a way to get the most out of it, you're never going to be able to put the pieces together. You can have strong hamstrings, but again, like, you can have the strongest hamstrings in the world, but if your core isn't stabilizing your pelvis and your hamstring, you're not going to be able to get the most out of them. And like, you can still be a very dysfunctional human being and strong. And again, the give and the take in this is where I'm very, very aware, especially with social media now, looking for opportunities to attack people's philosophies in training. The problem is only the problem when it becomes the problem. It sounds a bit backward a way of thinking, but when people talk about having back pain, low back pain and problems like this, and you'll get one field of camp saying, okay, it is a core stability issue. You'll get another group of people saying, yes, it's a hamstring stability issue. They're all right and they're all wrong at the same time. It can be all of it all together. But what you can't do is completely ignore what one group is saying and saying that they are wrong, because actually people who, so for instance, a good example would be to use, is it Suzanne Boyle, the gymnastic girl, British gymnastic. I think she's an American gymnast. But anyway, she's got this really, really lordotic back. Now, she doesn't have low back pain. So they turn around and use her as the example of, see, being lordotic doesn't cause back pain. Well, that's great, but you take someone else with that lordosis, and they will be in exquisite back pain, and the way that you fix it is to strengthen the core, engage the hamstrings, stabilize the pelvis, take the pressure off the spinal erectors so that it can all stack neatly. You can't use one example of a person that doesn't have pain and then say, as a blanket statement, well, then it doesn't count over there, because it all counts in silo in that individual. And so to say that, okay, so your back pain isn't caused by extension, so you've got to figure it out some other way. Actually, it might be, but how do you know until you try? Don't just dismiss it because you have someone using one fringe athlete as an example. The same as, you get some fringe bodybuilders who, maybe completely clean, steroid free, and they just look absolutely phenomenal. That's not the standard. Not everyone can walk around like that. They're just the outlier. We shouldn't take the outliers to argue a case one way or the other. We should look at people individually as they are. And so with this, linking it back into the whole systems thing, I realise now that the system has to work together. You can't just train individual body parts. You need to train the nervous system. You need to train the brain on how to put these things together, because otherwise you can do all the leg extensions in the world. It ain't going to make you a faster runner, And that is what it comes down to. It's what is, and again, the system mentality as well is, what is the purpose? What are you trying to get out of it? Is the other really important thing. What are you trying to take from training? Do you just want big quads and you don't care whether or not you walk around with a bit of a duck bum because all you want is big quads, and you don't care how that pulls you around, and you don't care about back pain? If you don't have, you might be one of those people that, never has any back issues. You may be absolutely bulletproof. That's great. That will be the outline. They may be able to do whatever they want. But time and time again, I'm experiencing with real people, in the trenches, that a majority of the time get the system working together and you won't have a problem. I don't take the fringe because they're rock solid. They're almost like bulletproof. You can do whatever you want with those guys on the fringe because they're just outliers, and athletes will always be athletes. No one made Usain Bolt a fast runner. Usain Bolt was a fast runner. His coach just worked with it, and just tweaked him. His coach didn't make him the fastest runner in the world. And they always say about his, having flat feet. And that's another, Usain Bolt's feet are perfectly flat. And to try and get him to like create these arches in his feet might steal away from his ability, And so in all of this, it's seeing what you've got, working with it, and then working with the system.
You touched on a really important point that has really resonated with me, and I talk a lot about it as well, is understanding the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? What is the purpose of it? Justifying that. I think a lot of people can fall off the path or not have the success that they want in achieving their goals, not through not enough desire, but not understanding their why. Is that something that you have found in your experience?
Yeah, the drive and the motivation behind it, isn't it? It's like why it's justification, isn't it? It's like that's the strength. Is it the S&C rule number one, isn't it? What is the justification behind the program? It's the justification behind why is if you can and the why. Simon Sinek's 5 whys, isn't it? You understand if you dig down deep enough and drill into it and find the whys, you'll find the motivation, and that is a powerful driving force behind it, and that is a root in everything within training. What is the root force? Why have you built that program? What is the justification? Why does that person want this goal? Is it because they just want to lose 5 kilos, or is it because actually they want their partner to be attracted to them again? Because if you can understand that, you're going to get buy-in, because then they know why they're really doing it, because no one really gives a fuck if they're 2 pound lighter, but they fucking care a fuck if like they can't pick their kids up anymore or run around in the park and play football with them, and connecting to that is power.
There's been a few connecting dots throughout this conversation, and for me, they've been in the power of people, in that communication, that guiding light, that developing your North Star. It's been about communication, it's been about connection, it's about that personalization, and we achieve nothing without other people. Before we wrap this up, is there anything else that we have missed that you think is important to discuss or identify?
I would like you've touched there about the communication and the connection. And one thing that I have learned over the last 10 years about myself is how important other people were and are in my success and how I'm doing now. The connections that we've made, the help that I've been at, like the drawing the information from you. You've been a huge help in guiding me in so many different directions. The people that have helped me in the past, and I understood, and what I believe was, successful people is they did it all on their own. And actually, the more I'm starting to have the fortune to be around very successful people, they have a lot of people around them helping them, and they're able to draw on that help, and they're not afraid of recognizing it. And that has been one of the most crucial things in the last year of my acceleration as how things are going, is because I'm realizing that I have so much support around me. I just need to recognize it and lean into it, which is why now I'm starting to do the same with helping other people. Like, it's really not, I've just sort of brought Zach on and he's doing brilliant. And it's so fulfilling, and the purpose of my why now is being able to help other people come through the same pathway, and give them a leg up. And it's so exciting to be able to be part of someone else's journey in this.
I love that paying it forward. It's now no longer about us. It's about the next generation and passing that on. And I think that's so important. And having these stories told, this experience passed on, this lifetime of knowledge, and giving everything, holding nothing back. We should always be looking to improve and outgrowing the mentor that you had. If you can find those people, what a powerful life it is.
One thing before we go, can I ask, since I've known you, you've always had like this level of self-awareness, this level of understanding, and it just seems like precision. You seem to know where you're going. You talk with clarity, and I've known that for as long as I've known you. Your drive, like how well you done within the fire service, how quickly you pursued that and climbed up through the ladders of that. Like with the businesses that you've done, working alongside with Reebok, with the 2 gyms in Birmingham, like it's like you had this laser focus. Is that something that you've always had?
No. It's come from having the start of my life constantly letting myself down and not wanting to ever go back to that. Like, it's been this cloud behind me going, hey, this is who you really are, and me trying to run away from that young man, that young boy that didn't live up to the expectation that I had that was put on me. And so I initially, very similar to you, built a character because I was such a weak individual that I didn't know who I was, that I didn't understand my place in the world. And so I built a character so that I could project that out to protect the real childish me that didn't really know where he fitted. And I had to break that down. And that took a long time to break down, but was the most important work possible because that little boy inside needed to be saved. And so through understanding my journey of who that little child is and what they want to do and fulfilling those like hopes and dreams in them, I have now created, or not created, I've allowed the fullest expression of me to be that. But this fear of what I used to be is still there, and that keeps me on the path. That is my North Star, is not allowing the cloud to come back over. To answer your question, I had to forge who I was. It was never an inherent thing, which I'd love it to be so. In fact, you know what? I don't. Because I think going through the work that I have done and continue to do keeps me on the path. I think if it came naturally, there wouldn't be enough pull to keep learning, keep evolving, keep giving more, keep bringing up everyone around me. Yeah. Right. Justin, that was a super powerful conversation. And as your friend, I want to thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, your openness. I want to thank you for what you're doing for your business, for the clients that you serve, for the people that you're bringing along as well. I want to thank you for inspiring people and bringing the personal back into personal training. I think that is a very sought after skill to have, especially in the modern era of AI and lone working, remote working, this disconnection that we have. I think it's very, very important to keep these service businesses alive and keep that human connection. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being an excellent friend over the past couple of decades, and it's exciting to be a part of your journey, my friend.
Thank you, brother.
Cool. We'll speak again. Thank you.